I was listening to a podcast. Prior to that, when you talk to like financial advisors and when you talk to people in general, everybody's talking about retirement and, a certain amount of money that you need for retirement and this and that and, whatever. Everybody's like so focused on retirement. And it's just like, it's a cultural thing. Like, okay, what age are you going to retire? How much money are you going to have? And are you going to be able to live comfortably and, blah, blah, blah. And what's funny is prior to that, I always wondered, why is everybody only focused on the money aspect of retiring? Like, yes, you want to have enough money to retire, but what about, your life situation, your family, your friends, and where you want to be living? But if you're doing the work that you love, why would you ever want to retire, right? I jokingly tell people, hey, I'm retired and I'm doing the work that I love. Why would I ever want to stop? And I tell people, I go, listen, I hope I'm working on a Wednesday and I die on a Thursday because that's how I want to go when the time comes. Hello and welcome to the Riyadi Club podcast, where entrepreneurs are the real heroes. On this podcast, we discuss tools, concepts, and ideas that are practical and inspirational for the entrepreneur. To learn more, go to www.riyadi.me. That's RIADI.me. Thank you, and I hope you find this episode helpful.
Hello entrepreneurs, this is Ruba Al-Tijani and welcome to Riyadi Club with Daoud Qaqish. Today we're going to talk about freedom and the entrepreneur. We usually don't associate the word freedom with entrepreneurs, but freedom is probably one of the highest values for the entrepreneur. This is part 2 of the session that we started last time. So if you haven't listened to the first part, I would encourage you to do that. But however, this is the second part. We're going to continue the talk about the freedom, and we've got Daoud in the line. David, hi, how are you? Tell me something about what we're going to be covering in today's session.
Hello, Ruba, and I want to welcome the entrepreneur that's listening to us. When we talk about freedom and the entrepreneur, that's really not the first word that usually comes with the entrepreneur, right? When you think about freedom, you think about freedom fighters, or you think about countries and, freedom from occupation and colonization and things like that. And that's fine. I love to talk business and entrepreneurship. So I leave the politics to the politicians because I don't think we need more politicians, but I think we need more entrepreneurs. And so I talk a lot about entrepreneurship and freedom. And as an entrepreneur or as a business owner, you may not think about freedom in that sense, but it's probably one of your highest values without realizing that it is one of your highest values. And so last time we talked about the 4 freedoms: the freedom of time, the freedom of money, the freedom of relationships, and the freedom of purpose. And today we're going to talk about freedom from status, freedom from retirement, and freedom from as opposed to freedom to. So there's a difference. Freedom from is very different than freedom to. And so these are the things that we're going to talk about. By the end of the session today, you're going to learn a lot more about these 4 freedoms, and you're going to learn a lot more about the freedom from status, freedom from retirement, and freedom from versus freedom to. Maybe you didn't think fully about these concepts and you haven't really articulated that, but you're going to look at this and you're going to have a more fulfilling and a meaningful life. It's going to actually help you become a better entrepreneur, and you're going to live a better and a more fulfilling and meaningful life. Here's the big takeaway for you as a listener. You can actually 10x your life. You can 10x your business. You can 10x your sales, your profits, your free time, whatever it is that you want to do, you can 10x that. You fill in the blank. What's important for you? What would you like to see 10 times of? And these concepts will help you do that because it's clarifying your thinking. That's a little bit of what I want to talk about. But again, if you want to learn more about the 4 freedoms of time, freedom of money, freedom of relationships, and freedom of purpose, go back and listen to the previous episode that we recorded. Today, we're going to focus on these other freedoms that I had just talked about. I want to start out with a question. And Ruba, I know you know the answer because it's in the notes in front of you, but I'm going to ask the listener. Let me see if you can guess who this person is. So he was adopted right after he was born. He's half Syrian by blood. He was a college dropout. So he went to college, but he dropped out and he didn't finish. And for a while when he was in college, he was homeless. He had a passion for calligraphy. And for a short while, he worked at a company called Atari. And during his time there, he had long hair. He walked around barefoot. So he was really messy and he had poor hygiene, like he was smelly. And so that became a cause for concern. And so they actually moved him to the night shift so he's not around that many people. If I were to ask you, can you guess who this person is? As a listener, I'm asking the listener, can you guess who that is? Now, he was incredibly successful and he would not wear suits as like, corporate executives. He would not wear a suit and tie, and he would basically wear jeans. He would wear a mock turtleneck, and then he would wear tennis shoes, right? That's basically what he wore. So I think I'm getting a little bit closer and closer. Some people that might know somebody who wears something like that. If I didn't know who this person was and I asked you these questions, you would probably never guess that it was Steve Jobs, right?
Absolutely, especially that he was smelly and homeless.
For a short period of his life, to be fair. Later on in life, he adapted.
I mean, that explains it. That's why he's not exactly stylish.
Well, I mean, I use Steve Jobs as an example, and there's, other people, actually, notably the Facebook guy, Mark Zuckerberg, right? One of my favorite things is when he was on NASDAQ or Wall Street, when he was ringing that bell, everybody usually wears a suit and a tie and goes and rings that. And he had a hoodie on, right? And things like that. But anyways, back to Steve Jobs, I like to use him as an example because a lot of people know who he is. He's that classic entrepreneur. Even though it was a big company, he was always innovating. He was that classic entrepreneur in so many different ways. And what I love about that is, if you think about Steve Jobs, he really had a lot of freedom. Even though he was incredibly wealthy, even though he had created a bunch of things, his whole life, he had a lot of these type of freedoms that we sometimes don't have. And so specifically, I want to talk about freedom from status. And they're going to work really, really, really hard. And then they get the house, they get the car, they get the money, they get that, they get the status, right? And it's almost like they become irrelevant after they got the status, right? They got the money, they got the car, they got, whatever. And status is more than just money sometimes, right? They've got the reputation and, all the things that go along with that. And what's fascinating, it's almost like they become no longer an innovative entrepreneur. And that's why I love to use Steve Jobs as an example. Steve Jobs, still in his last days, close to his deathbed, was still thinking about innovation, was still thinking about a lot of these other things. And he had that freedom of status, and it was an inner thing, right? Elon Musk is another great example, right? If you actually listen closely to what Elon Musk says, he doesn't really care about money that much. His big mission in life is to get humanity to try to start living on Mars. That's what he wants to be able to start doing. He wants human beings to live on two planets, Earth and Mars. And so actually in a recent article, he was talking about how his homes and all that money that he has is slowing him down as an entrepreneur, and he sort of wanted freedom. And so what's fascinating about what I talked about Steve Jobs is, with all that type of stuff that I had just mentioned about that, he had freedom from status. Of course he could afford a really expensive suit. Of course he could, afford a really expensive car. Of course he could afford all these other things. He's one of the richest people in the world, but he didn't care about any of those things. So I guess, when you think about Steve Jobs, tennis shoes, jeans, and a t-shirt. And my question for you as a listener, if you didn't know who Steve Jobs was and you just saw him walking on the street, how would you treat him?
Normal, right? Because he looks normal.
Yeah, how would you treat him, right? If you didn't know who he was, right? And so I love that, right? I love that that's what Steve Jobs, up until the day he died, he sort of had this freedom from status. He didn't really care to impress others in the sense of, hey, I've got nice clothes or a car or, this or that. And, he had a lot of that stuff, right? But his drive, his motivation was not status. And you see a category of entrepreneurs where, hey, there's a certain number that they want to hit, whether it's wealth or status or whatever, and they hit that, and it's almost like they retire, right? And I use the word retire, maybe they don't retire, but they're just done innovating, right? They're not being the entrepreneur that they were before that because, they wanted to hit a certain number or, a certain level, and then they plateau, right? They plateau, they get there, they plateau, and then they're not innovating and developing and growing anymore. So that's one of the freedoms that, I talk about, which is the freedom of status.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting to look at big and successful entrepreneurs such as Steve Jobs, and he was the guy who he didn't need to go to work, right? And he was at the top of his game. And you know what? This reminds me that even in his style of leadership or in his style of management, just to your point that he wasn't interested in the status, whenever he would innovate, he would invite a group of people from different layers and different levels within his organization. And this is actually a very unique management system, because the regular management system, it could be either like flat or it could be hierarchy, but his was kind of like a circle, and he would select these people from like different parts of the organization, and he would take them to like 1 week, or I'm not sure about the duration, for a duration of time. He would just take them and be together somewhere, and they will think and innovate, and everybody will bring something to the table. And that was very interesting, because he was not a guy who believes that in the status, either on himself or in the organization. Because normally what happens, if the organizations want to innovate, they would invite the top layer guys, right? They wouldn't pick someone from the lowest level of the organization, right? But he was so interesting that the way he would think was just different. And what interests me, David, is that maybe a lot of people are thinking different, but these are people who are thinking differently, and they made it. They made a lot of success even
Yeah.
though they're thinking differently. Like Elon Musk, for example, I was listening to one of his like videos the other day, and he would say, if something is so important, you just have to do it regardless of how risky it is. I mean, who says that? Who's thinking about that important? So for him, what he's doing is actually very important to humanity, that he has to do it anyways. So these are people who just like have really a much bigger vision than themselves, and it's just fascinating to look at them. Try to find our own Steve Jobs inside us. I don't know. For me, it sounds a little bit like it's just too different. I don't know if many people are thinking this way. I would imagine not so many people are thinking this way. But it's just incredible that even if you think in a different way, why not?
Yeah, that's a fascinating story about Steve Jobs, and he would get people from different layers, and essentially, I mean, put them in a circle and chat with them. I didn't know that, but that aligns really well with freedom of status. He wasn't afraid to talk to somebody that wasn't a big shot, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody was too good for him, right? Now, obviously, there's only so much time in the day, so he can't spend it with everybody. But that's really fascinating that he didn't just focus on, the top researcher or the top innovator or something like that. He would actually meet with everybody, and it's kind of like meeting with the frontline workers. And that aligns really well. He wasn't like, hey, I'm too good to meet with this, somebody that might be, a nobody, right, in the company or, whatever the case might be. So I also want to talk about freedom from retirement. And this is really, really, really fascinating for me because, the first time I was listening to a podcast and, prior to that, when you talk to like financial advisors and when you talk to people in general, everybody's talking about retirement and, a certain amount of money that you need for retirement and this and that and, whatever. Everybody's like so focused on retirement. And it's just like, it's a cultural thing. Like, okay, what age are you going to retire? And, how much money are you going to have? And are you going to be able to live comfortably? And, blah, blah, blah. And what's funny is prior to this podcast that I was listening to, prior to that, I always wondered, why is everybody only focused on the money aspect of retiring? Like, yes, you want to have enough money to retire, but what about, your life situation, your family, your friends, and where you want to be living? But if you're doing the work that you love, why would you ever want to retire, right? I mean, I jokingly tell people, hey, I'm retired and I'm doing the work that I love. Why would I ever want to stop? And I tell people, I go, listen, I hope I'm working on a Wednesday and I die on a Thursday because that's how I want to go when the time comes. And then, hopefully it's many, many, many years later. But the point is, I distinctly remember when I heard that concept, I'm like, oh my goodness, this guy is talking my language. And I go, yeah, I don't want to retire. Why do I ever want to retire? I mean, I'm in theory living in my retirement. And that's great for somebody that's driven, for somebody that is an entrepreneur, for somebody that is a business owner. If you're doing the work that you love and, you're not getting burnt out by working crazy hours and, doing things like that, and you're taking time off, you're taking free time to spend time with your family and friends and travel and, do all the other things that you want to do that are important for you, why would you ever want to retire? And I just remember like when I heard that, I was like, oh my goodness, this is right. And I felt a sense of relief because it was a different concept. Hang on. Somebody is talking about something that now I understand, and I don't ever want to retire, and I'm okay with that, right? And I'm like, I'm even telling my dad, hey, Dad, never retire. You love the work that you do. That's great. Keep doing it. And so he's on board with me now. He goes, yeah, of course. Yeah. Why would I ever want to do that? And so not only did I feel freedom after I really absorbed this concept, but I felt a sense of relief because it's almost like there's an expectation for everybody to retire at a specific age. And you're trying to do so many things between now and then. And then you say, you know what? What if I threw that concept out the window and I'm doing the work that I love? Why would I ever want to stop? Right now, again, to be fair, I'm not working in a factory, lifting things. And, I'm doing the type of work that I could still do when I'm 60 years old. I could still do when I'm 80 years old. I could still do when I'm 90 years old. Why would I ever want to stop? Right now, again, there's different roles where, hey, if you're using your body in a physical condition, there might be a point of time where, you want to give your body a break or, you want to do something like that. But anyways, I guess I keep asking, I say, I don't ever want to retire. And why would I ever want to retire from doing the work that I love? And again, the world has changed. Retirement was for a different circumstance and is not for most people today. As a listener, why don't you look at retirement differently? Why don't you retire today or next week from the stuff you don't love doing and focus on the work that you love doing? Retire from the stuff you don't, that's draining
Exactly.
you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Start today. Start right now. There's no better time than starting right now. Yeah, great. Retire. Just retire the things that are draining you and do the things that are energizing you. And I know for some people this might sound strange, but I'm telling you, who's a classic example of that is Sir Richard Branson. You look at the guy, he does not look his age, and he's doing more and more of the work that he loves, and he has zero interest in ever retiring. And I go, great. And when I started poking around more and talking to people a little bit, I discovered there's people that are doing that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I'm not the only crazy guy that doesn't want to retire, right? And there's a freedom and there's a comfort at the same time with throwing that concept out the window and saying, I don't care to really retire, like now you're not in a race and hit this magical number and this and that. Hey, hit that number, but keep on working. There's no reason for you to stop, just keep going. So I don't know if this message resonates with you or not, but like for me, when I look at somebody that lives a retired life, for me personally, that is a very boring life. And what I mean by that is, of course, I like to take time off and travel and do some of the things that I love. Don't get me wrong, but that's time for me to rejuvenate. I can do that for a week. I can do that for 2 weeks maximum. And then I sort of got to get back into the flow of things again. And I think if you're listening to this, your DNA is probably built that way. You probably have that same thing. So, that classic of, let me sleep in, let me wake up, let me read the newspaper, let me go play tennis with my friend, let me have lunch, and let me come back and take a nap. That's a nightmare for me. And I imagine that's a nightmare for most listeners. Again, it's good to have that break every once in a while, right? On the weekend and take, time off every couple of months. But to do that forever is insane. And here's the deal. And I didn't pull up this statistic, but this is fascinating. And then I'll come back to Yoruba after this. For people that retire, and especially for men, and I don't know the exact statistic, about 2/3 of them never make it past the 5-year mark.
Oh,
yes.
my God.
Yeah. They never make it because it's almost like they lost their purpose, they lost their sense of meaning, and they're lost. And I see that all the time. Like I love, me, when I meet people, I love asking questions. And so I'll meet people that are retired, right? I'm like, oh yeah, hey, how's retirement and this and that? Well, every day is the same day and this. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a nightmare for me,
So just do something.
Yes, exactly.
The concept is crazy because for me, I really never considered retirement. And the story of my dad, he was working until the last day that he was able to. So it's just crazy. Now when you're saying, yeah, to go and play tennis and meet the friends and all that, okay, this is all good. But so what then? That's like a holiday. So what is the idea of retirement? What do you do like when you are retired? Do you have some money and you're just having fun and sleeping and that's it?
Ruba, I'm having fun working. My business is a game and I'm playing the game and I love it. And I go, why would I ever want to retire from playing that game? I'm having fun.
That's exactly right. Because if you have the freedom to select your working hours and to just select the type of work that you get to do, so then retirement really doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't fit. I think retirement would fit for someone who's just really uncomfortable with whatever they're doing and they're just waiting until this is over. It is much more for someone who's just not living his life, someone who's uncomfortable, maybe an employee who's really squeezed and he just wants to have a break, a long break. But yeah, I'm with you on that. It just retirement doesn't make any sense. What makes sense for me though is to change the lifestyle so that you're enjoying what you're doing, and then retirement is just void, right? Because the whole idea is that, yeah, let me do the hard thing now, and then when I'm old, I'm gonna do the fun stuff. So why wait until I'm old and I can't travel, I can't move, I'm sick, and I'm lucky if I can leave bed. Why wait all this time until I change my lifestyle?
I will say this. I think if you're working within your unique ability, right? There's a lot of things that I enjoy. I enjoy, doing different things, but these aren't necessarily things that are in unique ability. If I'm working in things that are unique ability, which is, hey, I have a superior skill, I enjoy it, I love to continue to learn about that and things like that. If I'm working within my unique ability, I don't ever want to retire,
Yeah.
and the key is, and I think sometimes what happens is entrepreneurs, you're working 80 hours a week, you're working, 100 hours a week, whatever. Well, at some point you're going to get burnt out. And so what you want to do is you want to kind of, and I talked about this on the last session, have that freedom of time so that you're not hostage to your business. And the freedom of time is having time to do the things that you love that are outside of work or outside of your entrepreneurial venture, right? Again, for those of us that are involved in a business, we are entrepreneurs in a business that we love, it's easy to put all of our energy and time and focus on that. And that's great. But I always ask this question, what do you have going on for you that's outside of your business, right? And sometimes we get so caught up into it. Now, I was lucky enough where early on I saw that and I made a change in my life where I can, hey, do some other things that are important for me. But what's really fascinating, and this kind of plays into freedom from retirement, it's really interesting. Think about 3 stages of life: when you're really young, in your middle years, and then in your later years, right? When you're really old. And there's 3 things that you can have, or there's 3 things. And out of those 3 things, most people usually only have 2. So time, money, and energy. So when you're a kid, when you're young, you have a lot of energy and you have a lot of time, but you typically don't have money, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
college days are the worst.
Yeah, well, sure. Yeah. So for most people, right? For most people. Now, in the middle years of your life, right, when you're working really hard, you've got the energy and you have the money, but you don't have the time because you're busy working, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. And then when you get older, you have time and you have money, but you have no energy.
Hopefully, you have money.
Yeah, well, sure, yes. If you did things right, you have time and you have money, but you don't have the energy, right? So why are you holding off and sort of putting that off until you're 60 years old or 70 or whatever that 55 years old or whatever that magical number is? And so it's kind of funny. I go, what if I had the time, the money, and the energy, and I sort of pursued those things, right? And then also when you start thinking about that, you're like, hang on. One of the things that some entrepreneurs don't do is they ignore their health, right? Because now they're so focused on work and this and that and stuff like that. But if you maintain your health, all of a sudden now in your later years, you still have the energy.
Right.
So anyways, interesting concept when you talk about retirement for the entrepreneur, and say, great, why retire at 60? Retire today. And just start doing the work you love. Retire from the things that you hate doing, retire from the things that you find draining, right? And when you start hearing it that way, you're like, that's total freedom for me as an entrepreneur. And I can do that. There's nothing stopping me from doing that.
Absolutely. I think the sooner the better. Really, the sooner the better, because now that we're speaking about it, it seems very normal for us, right? Because we've thought about this long time ago, and it does require some energy to have this mindset to kind of like switch. Like for me, I needed to read books and listen to different people and discussions, and this podcast was really super helpful. The stuff that I was raised to think that this is the only way to do things, and but once you're there, once you have that mindset, you realize that life is not just about, okay, so you work in something that you hate for like until you're 60. So you spend the best years of your life doing something that you hate. And then you suddenly drop it, so you're not doing anything else. So what is the point? There's absolutely no point in that.
Yes, I was blown away in a good way when I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. This is exactly like, I didn't know how to articulate it or express it or say it, but then I heard it and I started researching it more and reading and learning. And I go, yes, I don't ever want to retire. And it's okay. I'm okay with it. Like, and like, anybody I meet now, like, don't retire, just retire from the things you don't like, So like the whole world and society is training you to do one thing.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you get this idea and now you have a permission to think differently. And you're like, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to do that. Yes, that is okay, right? Maybe my personal mission is anybody I meet to, get them to never retire, but to retire from the things that they find draining. So.
Yeah, I remember like now when we weren't, I met the husband of my friend, and he was like, "Yeah, so I'm retired." I'm like, "Okay, so what do you do?" And he goes like, "Yeah, nothing." And then, but he said that he was working in some projects, and I thought that was fascinating. I was like, "So that is good. You have time, and you get to work on your projects. So that is something good."
Yeah. Now, to be fair, as I said, with that stat, there's a percentage of people that have a lot of like, personal hobbies, that they like to do and this and that, and they can spend most of their time, but that's probably less than 20% of the population.
I think having a hobby is something different than having like a serious project. Like, I just think it's different. I don't know. Maybe I'm mistaken, but I just feel like a hobby is something different, right? Is it? What do you feel?
Well, yeah. I mean, I have a hobby of playing sports, right? Soccer and basketball and, things like that. And I imagine, I see myself as being an old, I'm in my mid 40s, but I imagine when I'm in my 60s or 70s that hopefully, God willing, I'm still out there and playing and, doing things like that. But those are hobbies. Those are not projects. Like these are things that I just do because, whatever, I enjoy them,
Yeah,
but they're not
exactly.
projects. They're not really meaningful, right? And I think some of the projects or some of the work, there's meaning behind that, right?
Yes, meaningful is the word.
All right, sounds good. So we talked about freedom from status. That's number one. Number two, we talked about freedom from retirement. And the third and last point I'm going to talk about today is freedom from versus freedom to. And so when you think about freedom, you can think about freedom from something or freedom to do something. And when I talk about freedom from, and maybe here, let me do this. Let me ask you as a listener, let me ask you some questions. As an entrepreneur or as a business owner, are you living your life to, being free from a boss, free from a corporate company, free from specific working hours, free from, whatever it is, fill in the blank, right? Are you living your life to be free so you don't have to work these hours, right? Or as an entrepreneur / business owner, are you living your life so that you have freedom to? And what I mean by that is freedom to create something new in this world, freedom to do something that it is that you want to do. What's really fascinating and I find interesting is, again, it kind of ties into freedom from status. If your big goal as an entrepreneur is to be free from, that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you're going to, and you're going to do pretty well. But if you shift that mindset from freedom from to freedom to, you'll be amazed at what you can do. And actually, you become a much more creative entrepreneur. And what I mean by that is, sure, I wanted freedom from corporate. I wanted freedom from a boss. I wanted freedom of that stuff. And I got it, right? But I was only thinking in freedom from scenarios. I was not thinking about freedom to pursue certain things. But when you start thinking about freedom to, there's creative juices that actually start flowing. And it's pretty amazing because in a freedom from, again, as an entrepreneur, you're going to reach a certain level and you're going to stagnate or you're going to plateau. In freedom to, you just keep on innovating. You keep on innovating and moving things forward. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of people really quick. And again, I'm using these big shot entrepreneurs because most people recognize them. If I was talking about, somebody, a small giant, a small entrepreneur, most people won't recognize that. So these are the people that I'm going to talk about because most people recognize them. So Steve Jobs, right? It was really fascinating. He never believed in focus groups, but he created things that people wanted. And if you think about that, I don't need an iPad. Like, I can live my life fine without an iPad, but I really, really, really want one to the point that I feel like I can't live my life without one. I'm not going to die if I don't have an iPad, but it's really amazing because for me, it's an essential part of what I want. So Steve Jobs created things that people wanted, and he was able to do that because he was thinking about freedom to as opposed to freedom from. Henry Ford had a really, really famous statement, and Henry Ford was the founder of Ford Motors, and like the first major car that he had produced. He has a famous quote. He said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. So he had the freedom to go and create and to innovate. And it was really interesting. And in a way, he also had, the other freedoms that I had talked about. There's other stories, but I'll stop on Henry Ford. And then Elon Musk, right? He was one of the founders of PayPal, and that's where he made a lot of his money. Right? In some ways, PayPal was his freedom from. He wanted the freedom from working a corporate job. He wanted the freedom to, do a whole bunch of stuff. But then when he was done with PayPal, he was free to go and he moved what I would say a freedom from status to freedom to. And he was able to go and start a rocket company, right? He practically has a competitive, a monopoly on that. But he had the freedom to go and start Tesla. He had the freedom to start the Boring Company, right? So he goes out and he does all these things, and it's pretty amazing. So I guess before we conclude, my question for you as a listener is, and I want to ask you this, your business, your entrepreneurial venture, do you have freedom to, or are you thinking about freedom from? And if I would encourage you, if you start thinking about freedom to, you're going to be a lot more innovative because now you have the freedom to X, Y, Z, whatever that is. Freedom from is good, but it's not as innovative. It's not as impactful as freedom to. And when you switch gears and you start thinking about freedom to, it's amazing. And it seems subtle, right? It doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal because we're still talking about freedom. But you've got a category of entrepreneurs that are in the freedom from scenario, which is good. And you've got these other entrepreneurs in the freedom to, and this is amazing. And the other piece that I will tell you is when you get into the freedom to category, it's more meaningful. It's more innovative. It's more creative, and it's more satisfying. You're kind of like, an artist, and you're a painter or a musician, and you're creating something, but you're doing it as an entrepreneur, and it's incredibly satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like for me, it was the beginning because you're just not comfortable with the corporate and you want this freedom to just to be yourself or freedom of money, right? You want to get free from poverty. And what I'm saying is money is important, right? You need to get money out of the way before you are able to really do something. I feel like, okay, it is good to have your freedom from get money out of the way because there are things that are important, right? You need to get your accommodation sorted out, food, basic stuff. Like for me, the basic stuff. But then, what is then? Then comes the question of the purpose, right? So, what is it that makes you crazy? What is it that is wrong and you want to correct it? And it takes time to search it and it takes time to find it, and there are like so many ways to find it. The easiest way is to probably connect to yourself and see what is it that really drives you, that you really don't accept, that you really want to change. Like Elon Musk is probably one of the clearest examples because he's doing these crazy things that are they necessary? Do we really have to go to space? What? But he is a person who believes that, yeah, this is important, this is necessary, this is what I want to bring to humanity, and this is important for him. And similarly, there could be important things for other people and for you, and you wanna lean a little bit to this authentic part of yourself and validate it and have it work and make it successful, right? It's not easy, but it's very interesting and it's much much bigger than just, yeah, I want to escape this life, I want to escape this boss, I want to escape this company, I want to be the boss of like so many people, or I don't want to work with anyone. This is all is like someone is just trying to escape something. But okay, once you did that, then okay, what comes next? What is your purpose? What do you provide that is much bigger than yourself, that kills you in a good way?
Yeah. What's your quote? Find the work that you love and let it kill you. Is that?
Yeah, find what you love and let it kill you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, I want to conclude and recap, and then Ruba, you can go ahead and you can sign off. So, we talked a lot about freedom. Freedom for me, and I'm guessing for you as an entrepreneur, is probably one of your highest values. But you may have not thought about it that way. And so hopefully this session has helped. I will tell you this, I can't put a dollar amount on the ability to control and choose my own destiny as an entrepreneur. It really is amazing. It's more than anything that anybody can pay me. And if you're an entrepreneur and you've experienced success, it's a life sentence. You're not welcome back to the regular, being a regular employee again for many reasons, right? You're unemployable. I'll call it that, right? So if you're an entrepreneur and you've had success, it's a life sentence. You're sentenced for life and you can't go back. And so my question for you is, why not take these concepts and that I talked about today and make the most out of your entrepreneurial life? It's a life sentence, so make the most out of it. And in the first session, we talked about the 4 freedoms. The freedom of time, money, relationships, and purpose. In this second session today, we talked about the freedom of status, the freedom from retirement, and then freedom from as opposed to freedom to. I hope these concepts helped. And here's my challenge for you as an entrepreneur, because many entrepreneurs are still stuck in the freedom from category. How can you transition away from freedom from so that you're an entrepreneur that is in freedom to? And to be fair, this won't happen overnight. It'll take a while for you to get there. However, think of it as kind of like a destination on a map or on a GPS. Take out your entrepreneurial GPS, and your destination should be, hey, freedom to as opposed to freedom from. And you go ahead and you do that. And I think you'll be amazed at the roads that you'll take and the life that you'll live, the things that you'll do, and the impact that you'll have. So if you're able to transition so that you go from freedom from and you move over towards freedom to, you'll be amazed because you're going to be a much better entrepreneur. You're going to have a much more meaningful and fulfilling life. And you've already, again, as I said, it's it's a life sentence, so you might as well make the most out of it, right?
Especially that you're not retiring, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You've got plenty of time.
That's right. And on that note, Ruba, if there's anything else you want to add, and then you can go ahead and sign off.
This was one of my most favorite topics, the freedom. And like we said at the beginning, usually we don't associate the word freedom with entrepreneurship. But actually, when you speak to entrepreneurs, you realize that they're doing this mostly because they want their freedom, because they realize what freedom is. But you have to try it. I mean, unless you tried it, you wouldn't realize what you're missing. But once you start it and you're kind of like unlocking these doors, the different freedoms, oh yeah, so now I have a freedom from, and what if I can have a freedom of purpose, and what if I could experience life as just mastering the skills that you're really good at, and at the same time being successful. And success is beautiful, right? And helping other people, and of course making money, because we're talking here about business. So yeah, this was one of the amazing topics that I love speaking about, David. And I hope that everyone who's listening to us has today acquired multiple aha moments that made you just really think about, maybe you validated yourself a little bit. Maybe you finally heard the words that you've been thinking about, but kind of like you heard them in our words, so it made more sense to you, and you felt that you are in the right direction, or maybe you opened your eyes a little bit to something new. And with that, I thank you, and I thank everyone who's listening to us, to this program of Riyadi Club, where entrepreneurs are the real heroes. And don't forget that you have something in this world, so rise up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Riyadi Club podcast. And remember, you have something in this world, so rise up. If you want us to cover a specific topic, or if you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, go to www.riyadi.me. That's RIADI.me. Thank you and have a great day.